Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. We had a tremendous conversation about the uncommitted, uninstructed campaign. Where is that going to go? Where is all of this energy going to go in America? We're going to see. A lot of people have a lot of opinions and they should express them. And then we can convene in the summer and work a lot of issues out. We've got Ari Bloomcatz, executive editor of In These Times magazine, joining us as well. But I have someone who has been running these campaigns for so long. I'm so glad that he's with us. Kevin Lampe only has a few minutes, but I'm so glad that you are with us today. And of course, you and President Biden have been close and have been allied for many, many, many years. But of course, you have been just a champion of, um, I would say, of anyone who's been on the downside of advantage, you and Kitty Kurth for a long time. And your politics have shown that. And I'm so glad that you are with us today to talk about this looming political violence. You know, we've seen this vision that's quite distressing, quite frankly, um, of President Biden hogtied on the back of a truck. Um, Talk to me. What is going on? And it's not just a truck; it is an official Trump vehicle. What are we seeing here?
We're seeing the manifestation of a demagogue. We are seeing that words matter and people react to words. I do not buy the argument that hate speech does not create hate actions. Trump's followers are predisposed to violence. We have already, we can't have any clearer example other than what happened on January 6th. They knew what they were coming for. They were armed. They were ready. They were trained. They were insurrectionists. And what Donald Trump does and knows is how to motivate to act out terribly. And he's appealing to the worst of our society. We've always had problems with this. When you look at the 1830s, with the problems we had in the 1830s with violence against immigrants, we look at the violence again in 1917 up until the run up to World War I, where particularly white supremacy and anti-immigrant violence increased many times over. And we're seeing it once again. We saw it in the challenges in the civil rights movement of the 60s that I watched and radicalized me, watching the violence on TV and radicalized me to be a champion for the left. But Trump is taking advantage of these people, and he is putting out there that violence is the only option.
So, is anyone saying anything about this?
I think they are more and more. We're hearing it more and more from left-leaning people like me to left-leaning program hosts on network cable network news, and we're seeing it articles all across the media, and I think the mainstream media is taking a look at it. The problem is that nobody's reading the mainstream media anymore, so it's up to all of us that are our own broadcasting companies to be discussing this on our social media channels. And for things like this, like your discussion today, Santita, these are the things that make a difference.
So, where do we go from here? I mean, because one of the things that people are talking about is not letting. I think that you have to let these people have their say. Because for me, the danger is when you hide these dangerous voices. I mean, muting them, I think is. I always like to let my enemy, please reveal yourself, because that way I have an idea. I know. I know. I mean, it's when you sneak attack me that I got the problem.
I agree. And sunshine is the greatest disinfectant. And this is important. I remember back in college in the early 80s when a neo-Nazi was going to speak, and my friends on the left were protesting and trying to get the speech canceled. But my reaction to it was, no, let's not cancel it. I want to know who that person is. More importantly, I want to know who his followers are when they show up on campus. And I want to know on my campus, who are the people that are following them so that I can take appropriate action. I'm not calling for violence, but I'm calling for the ability of shame and the ability of us, of knowing who these people are, and we knowing when they may dress up and look nice, and they say the code words, that we realize that in their hearts they're neo-Nazis, they're white supremacists, they're fascists.
Oh, they're former slave masters. See, I'm
Yes.
telling you, I have a problem with going overseas, reaching for bad actors and bad examples. We've had this here, the KKK.
Yes.
I mean, you want to talk about domestic terrorism? We don't need to go someplace else. I think that makes Americans feel better. But the fact is, we've had Black people were subjected to having their loved ones hanged on their front porches, and we were dared to take these dead people down. Our fathers, our foremothers, our forefathers, our brothers, our sisters, yeah, our pregnant women. And so I think we need to talk about. I think we need to put that. That's the American experience. Nazism is something we've imported.
Yeah.
What we developed here is the KKK. What we developed here is a slave master.
No, and these domestic terrorists, they have adopted the neo-Nazi theology.
No, they adopted from us. Remember, they studied us.
Yes.
Like apartheid, they took their notes from the United States. They learned from us.
Mm-hmm. But these organizations, we've been dealing with, the militias, the domestic terrorists, and we need, there's more domestic terrorist acts with domestic terrorism over the last few years than there's any type of terrorism outside this country. We have to identify domestic terrorists, and we have to know who they are, and we've got to stop them.
So what's the plan going forward in 2024? Are there any Republicans who are saying anything?
No, they're too scared of they're too scared to lose power. And they realize that the simplest path to it is to follow Trump. I think they're going to get a rude awakening in November, because I think the greatest weapon of all time is the ballot box.
So, okay, well, I mean, I'm hoping that will be the case, but the whole image with AI and with the advancement of technology, it is a frightening sight. It is really disturbing to see that image, and it looked so realistic. That's what was so frightening, Kevin.
No, and I think it's, I agree, but we need to, we got to, what your father taught me, keep hope alive.
Well, I mean, we're going to do that. But we also learned that you got to fight the power too, right? At the same time.
Warrior for justice.
Keeping hope alive means you do fight the power.
Yes.
Keep hope alive so that you can do that.
No, I got the detention slips to prove it. So, and the battle scars. So, but it's such a pleasure to join you today, Santita, and I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Sending you so much love. Give my love to Kitty Kurth.
I will.
Kevin Lampe, Kitty Kurth of Kurth Lampe. They are among the top crisis managers in the United States today, one among our leading Democratic organizers. Ari Bloomcats, I'm putting you on the spot here, executive editor of In These Times magazine. You said, well, I don't know that much about this, but yeah, we do, because we do have a history of this in the United States. We do have a history of this. I mean, when people said, oh my gosh, I'll just never forget when they killed Yitzhak Rabin in Israel. And people said, oh my goodness, we don't do this in Israel. I'm like, we do this all over the world. We killed Gandhi. We killed Dr. King. We killed Lincoln after he would not let the Confederate soldiers be diminished. He was killed. And so, my thing is, I'm just trying to figure out, and then, it's like we leap past our own history, Ari. I mean, certainly I look at the Nazis and I'm appalled. But there are appalling things that have happened here in the United States. We've got homegrown terrorists. They're right here, and they're still among us. They're still here. So talk to me. What about the image of not just, I mean, of the president of the United States being hogtied and leaders in one of the leading parties who won't say anything about it? It wasn't just January 6th, Ari. I mean, we have an environment in which people don't have enough money. They don't have any hope. Attorney Daryl Jones from the Transformative Justice Coalition. And when people's money gets funny, they go crazy. This is what we're dealing with, Ari. I've given you a lot to respond to, but it's just
no. It's, I'm afraid I've got maybe a unpopular opinion here about this. And I think that for a lot of folks right now, our level of compassion and empathy for Joe Biden is quite low. And not that there should be political violence like this or suggestions like this, but we have a president who is enabling a genocide, who's facilitating a genocide, who is watching as bombs are dropped on civilians all over the place, who is ignoring the will of the American public to stop this genocide. And so obviously this is wildly, inappropriate for, this image and for this to be happening. But I think that one, you asked, like, why is this not getting as much traction? And I think one of the reasons it may not be getting as much traction is because so many people see Biden as inherently violent and murderous right now himself. And so I think if you are going to try and claim any sort of moral high ground as a politician, the last thing you should be doing is helping facilitate and enable a genocide. So we know Donald Trump. We know Trump is going to act to Trump. We know the MAGA camp is to act like the MAGA camp. For them, this political violence is nothing particularly new. We saw them, bring out guillotines and things like this to the January 6th all over the place. This is not terribly surprising. This is, fairly like regular, almost behavior. And we've also seen it as a bit of training for Trump's followers, that the response should be violence if people don't get their way. That's absolutely dangerous, absolutely important, absolutely scary on so many levels. But your question about why it's not getting as much traction right now, I think part of the reason is because Biden's morality has been so wildly pointed in the wrong directions that it may be tough for a lot of the American public to really empathize in any way with this situation.
Ari, I don't know if you're being inconsistent here because, I'm saying I'm in agreement with you. And Attorney Daryl Jones, just walk with us for a minute. I remember I've just asked my parents about their involvement in the civil rights movement, why they got involved and how it is that they started working with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And in a time that was so violent, I mean, remember, before we even saw the Zapruder film, everyone knew that President Kennedy, as Nikki Giovanni said, was shot down. Our prince was shot down like a dog in the middle of the streets in Dallas. Everyone knew he'd gotten his brains blown out in front of everybody, in front of his wife. I mean, how horrifying is that? And we never heard a mumbling word from Jackie Kennedy because she was trying to save her family, because she saw a lot that she took to the grave with her. Let's be clear on that, right? And then, I was like, how did she take it? It was Medgar, it was Martin, it was Malcolm, it was just, you had LBJ say, I'm not going to run on Sunday. Dr. King is dead literally by Thursday. 6 weeks later, the leading line of the Democratic Party is killed. The man who'd been at his funeral, Robert Kennedy. I was like, how did you remain nonviolent? My father and mother both said almost at the same time, you had to keep the moral high ground, number one. And in order, because Dr. King knew with respect to Black people, Slaves are not born, they're made. And we came from such a vile and ugly, ugly background that the only way you were going to bring us out of that was with love. You not, I mean, turn the other cheek, we've got to forgive because we've got to heal white people, but we've got to be healed too. And the only way we can do it is with love. And so what you're saying to me is because what one of my interpretations, one of my takeaways, that's why I don't disagree with what you're saying. When you've ceded the moral high ground, as President Biden has done, you lose the sympathy of people. My father said if we had been violent in the civil rights movement, in that part of it, we never would have gotten the Voting Rights Act. We never would have gotten the Civil Rights Act, Daryl. We never would have gotten fair housing. Because we got the world's sympathy. Gandhi knew that. I mean, you had hundreds of millions of Indians then. They could have overrun the British Empire. They had more people than these other people had soldiers. But because they did it non-violently and they said, I'm willing to give my life. If you take it, here it is. Mm-hmm. I think you're on to something. My point is with you, Ari, you're on to something. And it's a very uncomfortable truth that you're on to. But I guess it's been surprising to me, Ari, before I pivot to you, Daryl, that he is not getting any. He's not getting a lot of sympathy. I mean, like, at all. And I think my point is, I think you're on to something. Is there any way you can pivot? Oh, what were you about to say?
I mean, the other thing that I think is like really tough, and I'm not sure, Daryl and Santita, if you would agree with this, but like, we've got a mass shooting happening every day, pretty much. We got, intense violence all over this country all the time. We got people who are dying because they can't get the right prescriptions that they need. We got people dying all over the place. We got, people that need, abortions go across states dying. There's just death all over this country all the time. And I don't know about you, but like we're sort of at a point where it's like, okay, I guess more death and like what's shocking like at this point, like what's like happening. And I think like this is a very dangerous place where like we can't necessarily parse like what is a rehearsal for like political violence and what is like actual like political violence. And we do know that January 6th was a rehearsal. Like that wasn't it. We know that was a rehearsal for what they hope to eventually do. So we do know like the political violence is real, but we are in a land built on violence, built on exploitation, built on slavery, built on blood. And like, I think for most folks right now, like it's hard to parse all of the death and meaning and postures around it. We're bombarded by it all the time. Every TV show, every newspaper, every magazine, we're just bombarded by death constantly, bombarded by the most vicious like things we've ever seen. It's kind of like impossible for a lot of us, I think, at this point to really know what to feel anymore when we're seeing these things.
Attorney Daryl Jones, what is your take on this?
Well, yeah, I think I'm in somewhat of agreement. I think that, we as a country at this point, there's some level of immunity that we sort of establish with regards to viewing and being around violence and political violence. And I think that when we start, looking at that, and one of the things that Ari said that was January the 6th was a rehearsal. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that January the 6th was the real thing. It wasn't a rehearsal. It just failed. I don't think it was a rehearsal, but that it failed, and it may be retried again, depending upon what happens in this upcoming election. But one thing that is clear is that for the last several years, there's been just the talk, the political violent talk that we've heard coming from the presidential elected officials, the divisiveness, the hate that's being spewed out. And that sort of, I think, develops into the mindset of the American public, one where it's almost like, okay, they're saying some crazy stuff, they're doing some crazy stuff. Don't worry about it. Just let it go. It's not as crazy as it really is. You had former President Trump that was doing all this stuff and then saying, well, oh, I was just joking. People just misunderstood all these nasty and mean-spirited things that were being said. And, I think that I roll out this scenario now with, President Biden being hogtied and on the pickup truck and all this other stuff. And the response was the same. Oh, this was just in gesture. This was just a joke. I'm not going to do this. This is just something I'm laying out. This is my expression of how I feel. But, you don't know how to take a joke, because that's all that this is. I think it's like the stage has been laid for political violence to be talked about, but not necessarily frowned upon. That it's open season to be able to do it, and it's okay, because at the end of the day, they're going to come back and say, well, no one's really doing anything until something actually happens. So yeah, that's sort of how I see what's going on right now. It's really horrible. And I tell you why, because I think back, Santita, to the last election, and in Arizona, where we had people with guns outside of polling places trying to intimidate people from coming in to vote. This is all an offshoot of this political violence and this hatred, this division that has been sowed into the American psyche for the last, I guess now 7 or 11 years, depending upon how you look at it. If you say it started with the response to the Obama election, all the way up to what's happening now. All of that right now just seems so deep rooted in our politics that I think that when we see something like the painting of former President Biden being on the truck, it doesn't necessarily resonate the way that it would have at one point in time.
Well, but wasn't it H. Rap Brown who said that violence is as American as apple pie?
Mm.
So this didn't start with Trump. It didn't start with Obama. We can keep on going back. That's why I said to Kevin Lampy, I hear you talking about the Nazis, but pump the brakes. That's 80 years ago. I want to go back in our history. I don't care when or where you came in the American experience. You're in for a penny, Ari, you're in for a pound. Whenever your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents got here, this is your history. This is our history. And it is a violent one. I remember when they shot Reagan. It was like, George Wallace. It's just, and I think that at some point, I think Ollie's making a really profound point about taking responsibility for what the energy that you put out there. Because when genocide is okay, your heart begins to harden towards somebody. Because you say, well, wait a minute. Now, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I'm not saying that it's right, Ari and Daryl. But I'm saying you got to be very, very careful what you put out there. That's why when I asked my parents about the nonviolent civil rights movement, because there were many other places they could go. Mm-hmm. And they said, If number one, the mission statement, Ari Katz, executive editor of the In These Times magazine, and I hope that you all will subscribe to it because it really is one of the finest magazines that's out here. They do great investigative reporting. Attorney Daryl Jones, Transformative Justice Coalition. Of course, he and Barbara Arnwine on WOL at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time every Tuesday. You need to support this broadcast. I think we've got to be very, very, I think we need to be honest about who we are. I think just going back to Obama, just going back to the path to Trump, I think we're not being honest. I asked my cousin about this moment, and he's one of my younger cousins. In fact, he and my baby sister were born on the same day, like an hour apart. Brilliant guy. And he said, I think America is having an honest moment.
Mhm.
It was like, whoa. He said, yeah, we're being honest about who we really are. That's why when President Biden said this is not who we are, I'm like, oh no, 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 no. This is who we are. This is why I'm afraid for my brother, our congressman. When he walked up his driveway late at night after we've been out, I sat outside the car because I'm afraid for him to walk to his door in a very nice neighborhood. I'm
Mhm.
afraid. I'm afraid that when he takes that congressional button off, which he does immediately when he leaves the Hill, like my other brother who was a congressman, I asked Jesse why he did that. He said, because it's a reminder. Because when I take off this button, this congressional button, I'm just another black man here. And I'm clear that I'm that when I'm walking down these halls. But I'm arrestable, I'm killable. And I think we have got to be honest, not just about the political violence, but the violence in the society. What did Dr. King say? We're the greatest purveyors of violence in the world today.
Mhm.
And here we are. And I think putting it all on Trump or all on this post Obama America is not being honest. This is who we are, y'all. Really. Sorry. This is it. But it just makes me sad because I'm seeing, wow. Um, you're right. I hadn't realized I'm seeing a diminished sympathy for President Biden. And that's scary,
Mhm.
really, because there's something in the American heart that's hardening. What do you
Well,
think?
I mean, that's one. I mean, there's one perspective that there's something in the American heart that's hardening, and it's a bit tough because it's been pretty hard. But I would actually say that there actually might be growing and increasing evidence that there's something in the American heart that is more hopeful than ever
Mhm.
right now. So, I mean, I think we are at a place. We are at a political place right now that is really fascinating, really scary, but simultaneously really hopeful. We've got more, progressives and open socialists in elected office right now than we have in like the last century. We've
Mhm.
got, and we've simultaneously got Donald Trump and the MAGA movement all over the place. We've got new formations, across the country. We've got this, uncommitted movement. We got the movements in Wisconsin right now, the uninstructed movements. These are movements based on a lot of our movements. If we look at a lot of youth movements like Sunrise, If Not Now, Dream Defenders, and so many others, Cosecha, like we are at a place right now where we have a lot of hope, a lot of energy, and a lot of movement, but we are up against simultaneously quite a bit of violence, hatred, and outright fascism. Um, and so I think like our political moment as a country right now is where are we going to go, and what direction are we going to go? And I think the next like 4 to 8 years are really going to show us. And it's always the cliche: every election is the most important election that we've ever had in our lives, right? Like we say it with every election. But like I think there's like real truth to that statement in general that every election can be, but there's certainly that truth like right now, and I think we're going to see a lot about whether or not our social movements and sort of the left of this country is able to really move forward in strong formation, and in order to do so, we're going to have to really figure out ways for the MAGA team and the right wing to not divide us from each other. If we can figure out a way to stay with each other, to not let our own boundaries and our own contours make it so that we can't organize and struggle alongside each other, then I think you might really see a change and transformation in this country.
Mhm.
But if we let ourselves be picked apart, if we fight with each other, if we don't organize with each other, if we put all these sorts of purity tests on each other, then I think we're going to also see the advance of fascism of the likes that we haven't seen before. But I think like part of the other difficulty, I'll say one more thing, and then I'll stop, is that, Biden sort of like ceding sort of the moral high ground is not just Gaza necessarily. We've now seen Biden cede the moral high ground in a number of areas because he's adopted the political strategy where he's almost trying to meet Trump on certain topics. So Biden on immigration right now is horrifying. Like, absolutely horrible. Like, it's essentially right-wing talking points, Biden on immigration right now. So, like, we've got a situation in which I think a lot of the American public is kind of like, what is going on? And the hope that we're seeing is for him to have some clarity, moral clarity, or for him to get out of the way so that somebody with some moral clarity can show up and lead this country.
But you know what? I think he does have moral clarity. It's just we don't like what we see. You know what? I was watching CNN this weekend, and they were breaking down the numbers, Ari and Daryl. What's interesting is that you're watching, and there is some alarm about the growth of support for Trump in the Black community. It's between 20 and 25%. I believe that because people are being much more honest and open. It's up to about 45% in the Latino community. People just being more honest and open. And I'm with that. Talk about it. Tell me, because I'm not judging you. I want to know how you arrived at this particular conclusion. I mean, I just want to know. But his support in the white community, Biden's support in the white community is growing, Ari. They know those numbers now. They know that the things that he's doing, the stances that he has been taking, it's stealing his support in the white community. What do you say to that? Because I think he's making calculations. This is a seasoned politician. He has been in D.C. at the top levels for 50 years. This is not someone who is not a master of the political system and of the political game. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows who he's touching. And he knows how he's touching people already, Daryl. He knows it.
Yeah, I mean, he is a master, but the Democrats did a really fantastic job losing, the first time to Trump because they thought they had everything taken care of. And, Biden has been leaning on voters of color throughout much of his career and certainly throughout the last election. And I think, that's one of the real questions right now is like, are voters of color are going to show up in Wisconsin? Are they going to show up in Michigan? Are they going to show up in Georgia? Are they going to show up in Pennsylvania? And it increasingly doesn't look great. So, Biden can take, maybe some more, white voters here and there. But he is, my understanding, losing quite a bit of younger voters. And he is in huge swaths of Arab American communities, of Palestinian American communities, and one of the things that we saw that I mentioned on the last show with Wisconsin is that the organization that really helped get him elected in Wisconsin 4 years ago, Block, now heavily involved in the uninstructed campaign. And that doesn't mean that they are working against Biden or that they are not going to work to try and defeat Trump. But what it does symbolize in so many ways is how disaffected voters are with Biden across really so many different demographics. And, turnout is going to be huge here. And if he's hitting some sort of ceiling on, white folk, okay, but that's not going to win the election at all. And so I think while he might be a political master in a lot of levels, that political mastery come on really convincing people that the argument for the lesser of two evils is one that people have to accept. And I think he is finally running into a situation in which people are not necessarily going to accept that argument anymore.
I think that's interesting. Daryl?
No, I agree that I think he's running into the situation where, there are African American voters that are going away from President Biden for various reasons. And so, part of what President Biden, I think, is trying to do is he's trying to then appeal to some of those would-be Trump voters or those independent voters that might lean toward some of the policies and the strength of a President Trump. And so, but when he tries to pick up that voter, he's pretty much giving up on the other voters that had been in his camp. And I think he's beginning to understand that I don't know how he brings the young voter back who is looking at this environmental stuff, is looking at the Gaza stuff, and is saying, you're not doing what you promised that you would do. You're going directly against our interest. They're part of that society. The younger voter is part of the strongest, diverse American society that ever existed, the most accepting that ever existed. And here you are arming Israel and killing these people in Gaza, going against the very things that we're asking you not to do. I don't know how you get that voter back. I don't know that voter comes back to a President Biden, or that voter then goes to either to a non-voter, or he goes to a Cornel West, or he goes somewhere else, but not to someone who has gone against the very principles for which that voter stands. So, that creates an incredible problem, I think, for President Biden. And we see it, not just with the young voters, but obviously we see it as well with the Arab American voters. And how does he close that gap? How does he stop the leakage from what he's losing right there? And I have not seen him present anything that starts to do that. And when I read this past week about his deal where he's sending more ammunition, more weapons, right, quietly over to Israel to be used in Gaza, and it just rubs. It's the fingernails on the chalkboard for that type of voter, and there's no way that he can do anything. I don't think at certain point, and we're pretty close to being at that point, to bring that voter back to his camp. And the question is, what then does he do? So then you start making these wild positions on immigration, right? And sounding like former President Trump. You start taking these other positions to try to gain something for everything that you're losing because of the policies that you've put in place. I think it's a horrible situation that he finds himself in. And if you're one of those people that are a supporter of President Biden, you've got to be wondering, what's he going to do to turn this around? I don't know the answer.
Well, I think he's pivoting to his original position. He's always been part of the right wing of the Democratic Party. He's always had right wing politics. I mean, when it mattered, he opposed it. He opposed busing. When it has mattered, he supported Clarence Thomas. When it mattered, he buried Anita Hill. When it mattered, right after we watched the video of Rodney King being beaten nearly to death, he goes on the floor of the U.S. Senate and proffers an officer's Bill of Rights. No mention of Rodney King. None. That's what he did. He's always done that. Now, mind you, people were afraid of LBJ when he became president. I'm not saying that people can't pivot for whatever reason. They can pivot. They can also evolve. But I'm saying that is not what we've seen with him. We've seen him swivel back to his original positions. And I don't think you can come back to the young people who I've talked to, Jonah. I mean, when I speak of Jonah Carr, she was on the show from If Not Now. He said, you got to understand, I'm not 25. The world that you've lived in, I knew a Black president. I've known women on tickets. I've seen my hopes raised, and I've seen them dashed. The world that you're giving me, I don't want, and I am not signing up for it. So with these young people, Ari, I don't see them coming back. When I see these 20-year-olds and these 18-year-olds, these people who are younger, they're like, oh, please. They've written this off. They're like, I lived through Trump and I survived him. That is not what they don't see They're not looking at this the same way. Some other political, if you will, pragmatists are seeing this.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like also a lot smarter than us, right? Because
Yeah.
like we're over here like talking about like this and that and like history and everything. They're looking up and they're saying there was no winter in Chicago this year. We are going to burn and the world is going to end. And he just approved the Willow Project not too long ago and has not really done, what he said he was going to do to really help this planet. Like everything's all, and like, obviously they're upset about Gaza and all of these other things too, but they've got their eyes on how do we save this world?
Wait a minute, would you
And
let that settle in on us for a minute? Did you hear what you just said? There was no winter in Chicago this year. I didn't have to wear my snow boots. And I have honestly not snow boots.
I didn't put a hat on the whole time. Like,
In Chicago.
In Chicago, but I really do think that like young people like these days. I'm so like it's incredible. Their political education, what they what they care about and what they know, and like their values and morale is just so like incredible on so many different levels. And I think they are on eyes on the prize. Like we got to save this world, and and we are all being incredibly useless in their agenda to save the world. And I think that's what they see our political establishment. Like, why even mess with these people? Like at all? Like none of them are like. We look for certain champions, right? Like we look for the squad. We look for like people hang on to people that'll help with the Green New Deal and all of that. But like, did that really happen? Even back in, I don't know if you all remember this like moment from one of the debates between Biden and Trump earlier, when Biden and Trump pushed him on, no, do you believe in the Green New Deal? Or are you going to take the Green New Deal? And Biden got real flustered. He was like, no, doing the Biden plan. Right? Like, or something like that. And so it's like, really? Okay, so the one thing that young people are pushing for across the country, like, you can't even, like, say because you're, like, so I, like, I agree, like, that, like, with you and Daryl here, like, I don't know how you get these young voters back without actually listening to them and without actually, like, implementing any of the things that they need to be involved in the political process.
I've had older people in their 40s and 50s and 60s for whom Gaza is the red line. I mean, of all backgrounds, they're like, there's something about that conflict that has really, that has touched a nerve with people. 1,000 Black churches, the most prominent congregations, Daryl, in the United States. Folks give you space. They have been pressured by their congregations. These ministers went to the president and said, hey, if you don't call a ceasefire, not a ceasefire ellipsis ... for 6 weeks. If you don't call a ceasefire, we're not going to support you. Does he not? I think he believes that the greatest organizing mechanism in the Black community still is the Black church. It's where we go. Even if it's just a cultural statement, it's where we go. Raphael Warnock is in the U.S. Senate on the strength of the Black church. Reverend Jesse Jackson's campaigns were powered by the Black church. Bill Gray, who was one of the most powerful Black men in the history of the Congress, he was a titan of the Black church. They have said to him, if you do not support a ceasefire, we're not going to support you in the fall. That's Jamal Bryant. That's Reverend Dr. Todd Geary. We can just keep on going. He has not heard that, Ari. Daryl, are you for real? And he's still going to these churches and they're interrupting his services. So his answer is to say, okay, I'm going to go to smaller and smaller venues. And I'm going to vet every single person that goes in there. Well, it didn't work at Radio City Music Hall. That's not going to work. And telling black people, oh, it's good, you're going to put Trump in because you're not going to vote. That's not going to work either, because it's not true. It's not true. What did Josh Feinstein from Jewish Voice for Peace Action say in the last hour? He said, we're trying to let him know, if you don't do this, it's your fault, not our fault. So, I mean, you guys, in the last few minutes that we have here, help me, because I'm telling you, on the last station, the station that put me off the air, bless their hearts, one of the complaints they had was that I wasn't Democrat enough. I said, do you not know what's going on in the community? I can't have this platform and not give voice to you, Ari, and you, Daryl, and these folks who approach me in the grocery store and at Rainbow Push and when I'm out, who are very upset. Everybody talks about the fact that we had no winter in Chicago. In Chicago, where you used to get frostbite in November. That didn't happen. Help me, Daryl. I mean, what did Dr. King ask? Where do we go from here? What?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that there's a simple answer. I do know this, that, we elect representatives to represent our interests and to represent the interests of the community. And if they're not representing the interests of the community, we're supposed to replace them when you vote for somebody else. We're in a situation right now where, President Biden, you said that he's not hearing the black churches. He hears the black churches.
Is he ignoring them?
He's ignoring them. I hear what you're saying. This is what I'm going to do.
Is that what he's doing with the young people too?
That's what he's been demonstrating at this point. He hasn't made the changes. If you hear me and you don't agree with me, then you're just going to continue doing what you're going to do, because you don't think that I'm going to vote against you. You don't think I'm going to take those steps. And I think he's probably hedging the bet that at the end of the day, you're not going to vote against me, because what's on the other side is worse than what I represent. So while I may not be precisely what you want, I have more positives than the alternative. And I don't think that's a game that he really wants to play right now. The way that I see it, the way that I break it down, the American people have had 4 years of President Trump, and now they've had 4 years of President Biden, and they may decide that they don't want either. Right. So a lot of them will sit it out. I didn't like the first Trump's 4. I didn't like Biden's 4. So I'm going to vote for somebody else. I'm going to vote for the third candidate, the third party, which then makes it all boil down to who's going to get their base out. And the base for the Democratic Party, a strong part of that base has always been the black voter. And based on what's happening there, I don't know that black voter is going to be there. And what we're hearing is that the black male voter is defecting from President Biden. So I think he has a lot of work to do. If he hears us, he needs to start acting like he hears what the young people and the other voters that have supported him are saying, because I don't know that he's demonstrating that up until this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ari, I think he's making a point. People are talking. Well, there's a wonderful song from 1,000 years ago. Everybody's talking at me. I don't hear a word they're saying, only the echoes of my mind. Come on, I'm a musician. I mean, everybody's talking to me. I don't hear you. And that's I think that's what's galling to our young people. I think that's what's galling to so many people in America, because I'm listening to Washington Journal on C-SPAN in the morning, and I'm hearing older Americans who are disgusted. I mean, just with everybody. They're not enthusiastic about everybody, but they're very disappointed. Mm-hmm. They're very disappointed in what's happening on the fact that they don't have any. Well, they're going to exercise some options. And I'm saying that we better be very careful, all right, because we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. We don't know what's going to happen at that convention or at either of them. We really don't know. We act like we know. We Ari, we have no idea. The last 2 minutes belong to you.
It's kind of, yeah, no, we don't know. I mean, we live in a political world where one yeehaw can derail the entire campaign of a candidate
I
talking
think you
about
got
potty.
too much Beyonce in you. Too much Beyonce.
Oh, Cowboy Carter all weekend. Texas Hold'em by far the best song on the album. And if there's one takeaway from my comments here, it's everybody live that album as much as possible. But I think that one of the lessons from the uncommitted campaign and the uninstructed campaign in Wisconsin, and I know I've been harping on this a little bit, but it's because I'm so honestly like touched and by it, because I can't really find much inspiration anywhere. But these are people, right? But there are people here who actually once again believe in hope, once again believe in the possibility for change and transformation. And I am taking so much energy and inspiration from them, because if we can maintain that there can be a world in which change and transformation is possible, then we can find our way there. And things are not locked in, things are not predetermined. We make our own road by walking. And, there is real possibility here for change and transformation. And I think that's like really one of the big keys here is if we still can find ways to hope, then we can still find ways to be involved in the electoral process and in the political communities in ways that can have positive outcomes for so many of us, because there's so much at risk. There's so much happening right now that is so deeply, deeply horrifying and terrible, that I do believe that the last thing we can do or should do is sit on the sidelines. And so now we have, these campaigns who are saying, so you want us to sit on the sidelines? No. We're still going to be involved in the political process, but we're going to have a different situation here that's built on hope and change and transformation. It's those avenues that we've got to keep finding throughout everything right now. If those are the lessons that we can learn from the uncommitted and uninstructed campaigns, is that those avenues exist. And to quote another song, Santita, from Leonard Cohen, right? It's the cracks that let the light come in, right? And so let's keep looking for those.
Well, you know what? Dare I say, keep hope alive. That is, it might not. It's never been a trite statement. You got to keep hope alive, no matter what. You must keep hope alive, and hope is alive. People found the light in that crack. My father often says, even in concrete, you can see a beautiful, beautiful plant come through. All you need is a little bit of light. That's all. That's all. And that's what people are doing. This is the time when you work out all of your kinks during the primaries. But you know what? We have a republic. We don't have a democracy. And this is when you begin to force the democracy into existence, where you have choices, where you have options. We keep talking as if we only have two options. We don't. You have other people who are running. And you must force the people who are running, all of them, to speak to you and your concerns. You got to do it. This is the only way the system works. It works when you work it. And when it does not work, it's because you have not worked it. Come on, everybody, get involved. Get a subscription to In These Times magazine. Please support it. Many of us are looking to alternative sources. If you want some of the best investigative reporting in all of journalism, support In These Times magazine, because it is supporting you. And of course, the Transformative Justice Coalition. No one stands taller in this forest of voting rights than you and Barbara Online attorney Daryl Jones. Get out there, get registered and vote and make things happen. Don't stay home, vote. You have an option. A, B, C, D, E, all of the above, or I want someone else. Write somebody in. Make your voice heard. Get out there and get involved. I love you, everybody. Can't wait to be with you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. Get out there and vote. Get out there and vote. Get out there and vote. Love you, everybody. God bless. AM 950 Radio. Keep it locked right here.